Good afternoon. So one of them asked me what church you all go to. You're all sitting back and as far away as humanly possible. So, yeah, okay, all right. That's
Not
good.
in your face.
That's right. So we are here to talk today about civility generally, and then also the concept of whether it's attainable. And yeah, it's a serious question. And so each of them are, well, they cover all of it generally. They're each covering a different component. One is going to talk more about board relations and meetings and that type of thing. Another is going to talk more about inside the workforce, maybe with employees generally. And then another's main area of concentration is in relationship with citizens and our community members and what that means. So, you know, I thought it would be good to kick it off. I'm Jonathan Lewis, and they'll each introduce themselves. But I thought it'd be kick it off with, how are we defining civility? I think most of us sitting here will think about it in the context of our commission meetings or whatever. But it's probably good to have some general concept that we're all talking the same language. So, of course, when in doubt, go to a dictionary, right? Look it up. Courtesy, politeness, consideration, respect. And in terms of characteristics of civility, acknowledge that others are entitled to their own perspective and understand that the other person's position is based on their beliefs and values. So just as kind of we go through this, and we're perfectly fine with this being, I think we'll all agree that if you have questions while they're talking, you know, raise your hand and we'll try and get it, and then we'll save some time at the end as well. So I thought we would start big first, so we'd start with the idea of the relationship at our meetings and with our public process first. So maybe we'll tackle one first. You know, some people feel that civility is in decline, particularly at public meetings. Do you think that's true? And if so, why?
Yes, and thank you, Administrator Lewis. My name is Jerome Fletcher. I'm the City Manager of Northport, Florida in Sarasota County. I do believe civility is on the decline, and I think there's multiple reasons for that. I do believe that there's a certain level of empathy that is missing out of some of the conversations that we're having, you know, within our boards. We do not always mirror the behavior that we should, and we allow some of the behavior that is more rampant in our communities to come to our board meetings. And we as humans and creatures of habit, I understand why it happens, but I believe that when you're on a board and you are in one of the roles that we are in as far as the leadership of the administration of the local municipalities that we represent, we have an obligation to be better and to hold ourselves to a higher standard. The civility that we are accepting now, and we heard someone say that yesterday, the culture that you have is the one that you condone. We should not be condoning the behavior. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but when it happens, we have to address it, and we have to course correct ourselves and hold ourselves accountable to a higher level. And if we do that, then that, of course, has its pros and cons, but the most significant pro should be that the behavior does not get worse. It happens, you address it, you move on. Because people will only do and continue to do what you allow them and what you tolerate to be done. So from my standpoint, I believe that we all have a fair role in controlling and guiding the civility, especially as it relates to our boards. And whether it's the administration or the elected officials, we've all taken the job and the role so that we can be an example of what we want our culture of our community and our organizations to be.
So you definitely sound like that you think that there is a way to get back to more civility in the meetings and based on how we handle it and our boards handle it.
Yes, I believe that it's possible to get better. I believe that it takes effort, and a lot of people aren't willing. Effort is hard, and it's easier to just fall into the habits of the people who are in your ear and project yourself and behave in a manner that they can relate to. But when you set the bar high, which hopefully you all are, and we all are, then we don't lower that bar because someone else doesn't sort of fit into what we're trying to do. We work with them. We put in the time. We try different tools and mechanisms because everyone doesn't react to the same thing at the same rate. You have to figure out what works for different groups of people. And you try different strategies and techniques until you get one or some that work for the majority of your community, and then you lead by that example.
That's great.
Jonathan, if I could
Well, I'm actually going to you next, but I'm going to switch the question up a little bit for you.
All right.
So, he kind of led into, when dealing with our community members at large, our citizens, what that role is. And actually, our transactions with our community are much less at commission meetings than how our frontline employees, the employees who have to do that daily in-face transaction, what do you see as the behavior coming from the community for those employees at that frontline transaction? Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jonathan.
But also what we expect of the employee and what behavior, as Jerome said, about what we condone, what we're trying to build.
Great, thanks. My name's James Clinch. I'm the Assistant City Manager for the City of Venice, and really love what I do, and certainly as an Assistant City Manager get the pleasure of being involved in operations to a much larger detail there, which is great. And the public, especially in this season right now, it is truly a struggle with civility, and it is a tough expectation to place on them to handle themselves with civility. That's an expectation that our staff struggle with every day, right? The golden rule is wonderful, and we all wake up in the morning with that intent and hoping that other people will treat us the way that we treat them. But the reality is that's just not what happens, right, in our communities. And I do think that has certainly gotten worse over the last several years. But what I see as our role as city management is a couple of things. Supporting our staff in what they do, recognizing that they really are the battleground, the front line of defense for civility in our communities. The meetings matter, the boards matter, the way we handle ourselves as leaders, we're setting the example, certainly very significant and important. But what happens at the counter in the cashier's office also really matters. And from a quantity standpoint, you're getting so much more interaction on that level. I do like to travel around to our different departments and really, not micromanage, but just be involved and help to be a resource to them from a civility standpoint. And I don't know if you experience this in your communities, but a lot of stuff filters up to us, and I'm the first one to take that phone call. I really think that our staff appreciates that. When something gets to the point where it's getting toxic for some of our staff members, they come to me. They feel comfortable sending that person to me, and I kind of enjoy it. It's kind of weird, I guess. But I look at it as a challenge. This is an opportunity, somebody who's having a bad experience with our local government, this is an opportunity to not necessarily change their mind, but at least let them be heard and let them hear our perspective as well. So I think that's our role as administrators.
So is the way you're doing that with your coworkers and the people who work for you is just by setting the example, or how are you setting that expectation of, because a lot of times we get what we give, right? Mm-hmm. So how are you establishing within that frontline workforce the expectation of how they should behave?
So I think it comes down to culture. Great presentation yesterday by Sam on accountability and culture, and making all of your managers and frontline staff aware that civility and the way we provide customer service is part of our culture. And it's really a not compromisable trait for us. We have, I had to laugh a little bit at the presentation yesterday about, just basically fire the people that don't get in line. But there's some truth to that, and it's a little harder maybe in local government than in the private sector. But we have we have taken a more aggressive approach with discipline in the last several years to customer service. And I think, not in a way that creates fear, but in a way that does create accountability, that, we're not going to tolerate disrespect on our end. It's going to happen on the other end, but we're not going to be able to tolerate it on our end. And then that combined with a measure of support as well, that when that disrespect gets to the point where you feel unsafe or you feel unable to respond, that we're there for you. You're not in this on your own.
Rich, when we talk about how that interfaces with our employees, out of those of us up here, you've been in public service the longest, and particularly in public safety. How have you seen that expectation change throughout your career, whether you were in a different state or here? What's that look like for you?
Thank you, Jonathan. Rich Collins, Emergency Services Director with Sarasota County. And I started my career 32, almost 33 years ago as a firefighter in the suburbs of Chicago. And I would tell you 33 years ago was a much different time frame in the fire service than it is today, in many regards of how firefighters and public safety, working in a fire station together for 24 hours, responding on calls. There's a lot of camaraderie that builds up. That camaraderie can extend into horseplay and joking. And I found out early in my career that if that starts, it doesn't stop, because it continues to escalate till somebody gets hurt or somebody gets time off. But there's been a lot of things that have changed over the last 30 years, a lot of growth in the profession as it relates to things out of cases and things that have occurred with harassment and hazing, and those types of things have definitely gone down in our profession. So that's been very positive. But on the civility side, there's been a move that I think has kind of amazed me as a public safety professional. I've seen I have a Facebook account, and I don't do anything other than leadership quotes and pictures of sunrises and sunsets, so that's about my extent. But you see people that have worked together for years in a career. I mean, they go on calls in emergency incidents, they protect one another, and yet online, there's civility and discussion about a position reference to what's going on in our world, and you see people attacking one another, that they work together. Every third day they're going to shift together, but they're attacking one another on a Facebook page. It's absolutely amazing to me the amount of incivility that occurs in that regard. And I think it can bleed its way into the fire stations. Yesterday, I think there was some really good discussion in the afternoon session, and they were talking about Harvard Business Review, and it was one of the things that I had found in doing some of the research for this. 98% of employees experience uncivil or disrespectful behavior in the workplace, and of those, 80% say they lost work time worrying about an incident. 63 said that they lost work time avoiding the offender. 50% treated rudely at least once a week. 25% taken their frustration out on customers, and 12% left their jobs due to uncivil behavior. And one of the things that we just recently did is some training out in the field related to civility. And we identified that out of that, we have maybe some firefighters that are moving stations, and we're going to be doing some research. Why are they moving stations when they can elect to move? Is it because of the tenor inside of the station and how people are being led? So we're trying to take a deeper look at it. But incivility in that regard has been a bigger issue for us.
One of the things, as I was doing some homework for this, Jerome, I came across, and it's made some sense to me. To be civil in the political sense means to engage in a kind of discourse that does not harm, injure, or offend our fellow citizens. So when you, in the organizations you've worked, whether it's one you're in now or others, how do you guys enforce that at the public meetings? How do you encourage the behavior that doesn't harm our fellow citizens while we may be having a debate?
Yeah, and that's a good point. So today, in my opinion, everybody is very sensitive, and
Yes.
and about what? About everything. I mean, we've sort of gone so far to the other end of the spectrum that you really can't say almost anything without offending someone somewhere somehow. And you really have to measure what you hear by the intent of the person who is saying it. You know that someone is going to say something, but you really need to try to understand if they're trying to intentionally harm someone or where they're coming from with their words that they're choosing to use. I don't believe everyone's intent is bad, and I hope that we don't assume that when we hear people in these kind of conversations. But there are tools that you can use to make sure that you sort of guide those conversations in a more positive manner. And a lot of it is something that you can control, and that's how you choose to view people and the conversations that they have. If you are believing or you are approaching a situation with the mindset that this person is trying to do me harm, then you're going to take offense when they say, "How are you doing?" And that is something that is not a good place to live. You know, you give people a little bit of latitude in order to have that conversation and have that debate and let them hopefully get to a point where you can understand that, okay, this conversation is not created to offend, it is just created to hopefully have a good exchange of information. There's also training, whether it's through a mediator for our leadership, where you can have someone come in to give strategies and techniques on how to better work with each other as a board and as a leadership team. And then that sort of pushes its way down through all facets of your organization so that they see that if at the highest level that they can receive training and benefit from it, then why can't you benefit from it? The employees, why can't they get customer service training to help them better be prepared to deal with conversations that are outside of their control? Because like he said, we hold our employees to a standard of, well, we don't want you to respond that way, and maybe they don't know how to respond in a different way unless we give them that sort of training. So I think that there's always ways that we can better be prepared to handle these difficult conversations, but it really starts with you as the receiver of the information. And our levels of our own personal history and scars determine how we receive information, and we should always look at trying to receive it better.
But, you know, I think that's pretty meaningful. I mean, where we own that part of it, and this is not in our questions we discussed, but you just made me think of it, so I'm going to go there. Yeah. We, all three of our organizations, I believe, do some type of personality profile, you know, Myers-Briggs type thing with I think you guys use IOP, right?
We did, and we did a disc profile
and
too.
Did this.
Yes.
And I think you guys, I think Ed had brought one in, you guys do, and we do people mapping at the county. But one of the things we use it as, and I'm curious how you deal with it, to use that to deal with the potential civility, is to not just understand yourself better, but to understand your coworker a little bit better. On disc, they're DI, I'm SC, you know.
Right. Oh, yeah.
How do you three think that type of knowledge about your coworkers play into how you might be able to understand them better?
So from our standpoint, we used it as a technique as a communication tool. So when you talk to someone who has a different personality type and you're almost speaking a different language, you're really not. You're just needing to use a different words and method of approach to make sure that your voice is heard in the right way that you want it to be received. And that might mean talking in a way that you're not used to, but showing that level of flexibility to not be so stubborn that your way is the best way will allow you to be a better teammate and coworker and leader in what we do. The different tests, they all sort of drive you to the same point, which is to say that we're all different, and learning how to have the best impact and the fastest impact on your colleagues and your target audience is how you get to success faster. I think when people close their minds and they think that, well, you know, I'm a CD and, you know, this is how I am and everyone needs to gravitate towards my personality, that's not the traits and the characteristics of a good leader. You want to make sure that the best communication tool that has ever been created is listening. And a lot of people get that first step wrong way too often.
James, Rich, what's your take on that?
So I think, we're talking about emotional intelligence, and I think that is critical to civility. And in fact, it's a great explanation for some of our challenges as we deal with the public and other people in our community. One of the great things about this conference is you can tell, city leaders have a lot of training. It's a skill. You're not born emotionally intelligent. It's something that you typically learn. I mean, some of us are naturally better at it than others, but it's something that's typically got to be taught, and that's important as we work with our staff members to understand. Like you said, they typically don't wake up in the morning going, "I'm going to offend somebody today or below my top," but it happens because they don't have that skill set to understand and to show empathy for certain people who are coming to them with a problem. So I think training is critical. We do it in a lot of different manners. We're a smaller organization, so a lot of it happens, one-on-one as well. But truly having that emotional intelligence IQ is really important, and you can't do civility without it, in my opinion.
So I think this is a great question. One of the things that, we've done people map, as you were talking about, for our primary leadership in emergency services. And we've had a big change recently in new fire chief, new additions in our operations and emergency management. And so we're doing quarterly teams meetings, and we're bringing all of the administrative staff in, so all the way down to our assistant chiefs, and it's about 50 people, and we did people map for everybody, and so that all of the employees would understand both their leader and themselves and how they communicate. And then next quarter in July, we're going to be doing some stuff very similar to what Alan was doing with EQ, and how does that relate in how you communicate, take information in, and share information with one another. So we're continuing to do that to try to build that connection, and how we speak with one another matters.
You had touched on something, Jerome, in terms of how our boards, and I know all your boards are perfect at dealing with civility in meetings, both personally and as well as with the members of the public, but that doesn't happen everywhere. And one of the things I've been most proud since I've been at Sarasota County is, while other jurisdictions may have been looking to limit public comment on items that were unpleasant, my board was very insane. I would like to be able to claim that it had something to do with good management, but it really had nothing to do with good management. I had a chair at the time that was insistent, everybody's going to get their chance to speak. You all need to calm down. You need to be able to get a good recording here in case there's a lawsuit. But everybody, you don't have to agree with anybody, but everybody's going to get a chance to speak and just be respectful. What are the impacts when you have either positive relationships, civility, or maybe the opposite, on how you then have to deal with your team? What your team expects. I used to work for an organization. They always used to ask me, "Hey, boss, how come you expect us to behave this way, but the board behaves that way?" And, I would say, because they don't work for me, but I did have a better answer to that. How does it impact your team, either pro or con? Maybe, James, you kick it off first and then come to Jerome?
Sure. So, as much as you try to establish, the city manager as the leader of the organization, staff are all watching the board meetings, and they're all closely monitoring everything that happens there. So there's no getting away from that. I think we've been fortunate to have a city manager that's really taken a strong role in educating the board on the proper way to have civility at a meeting, but a lot of it depends on your chairperson. We've had years recently with a very new to politics mayor who really had no idea how to manage a meeting or run a meeting. And in 3 years, I could say with a lot of educating, it got better than it did the first year, but it never got good. It was always a struggle. And then conversely, we've got a mayor now who spends a lot of time, and civility is very, very important to him. So he goes through that statement at the beginning of the meeting. He respectfully keeps the crowd under control to the degree that he can. And I think that makes a huge difference, and it absolutely affects our staff members. It affects their morale, it affects their behaviors, and it makes our job as managers a lot easier when the behaviors of the board are matching up with the culture that we're preaching from our chairs.
So what I'll say is, I think there's something we need to acknowledge, and that is the civility or the lack thereof that we're seeing is being driven by, one, a country that does not like its government right now. We need to be clear. We are not in very popular positions. We are punching bags. People have other things that are either going wrong at various other levels of the government, and here they have a time to come in and speak to you for 3 minutes, and it's not normally going to be pleasant. And so if we know that and understand that, then our teams and our board members have to say, we have to accept it and endure it. When we talk about eliminating or changing the time that they speak, we give 3 minutes of public comment, and if we were to change that in the manners of which we receive that feedback, we would be accused right now of running from transparency. They would say that, well, you don't have thick skin and you don't want to hear what I have to say, so you want to change the rules. So changing the rules while you're in the midst of the storm is probably not the best approach and thing to do. So right now, we have to endure it. And bless James' heart, he doesn't know people who wake up to offend people. Well, I have some people who I want to introduce you to. I can guarantee you, they wake up and go online just to offend people. But it's what we're dealing with. It's the community. It's the culture of the country. And I hate to say it, some of it is well deserved. You've all seen in your other municipalities people in leadership roles who have made mistakes, and so it fuels that anti-government and conspiracy theory thinking. And we have to sit there now and actually work our way through that. And we have to make sure that we don't give them the chance to say that they are right. See, I told you so, I knew you were trying to do something. And then they get up and they're uncivil to us. So the best way that we can combat that is not by changing the rules, it's just by keeping our integrity and making sure that we live the values that we preach on a daily basis.
Rich, for you, how does that civility that plays out, either pro or con, at those meetings impact the internal dynamics of our coworkers, or even then externally with our community at large?
Gosh, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. It really comes down to doing exactly what Jerome was talking about. You have to model the way for your employees to see that you deal with it, you carry the load. And if you're carrying the water for them, I think it's easier for them to get on board even in the tough times. During the downturn, we were under a lot of pressure to cut back on fire service where I was working, and there was an extreme group in the community that were attacking every aspect of what we were talking about with assessments and what was being charged, closed fire stations. And in community meetings, we'd have some uncivil people starting to attack staff. And I would just get up and say, hold on, that question needs to be directed towards me. That's staff. That's not, you want to have a problem, talk with me and direct to me to take that off of staff. And that really helps staff stay on board. At the same time, internally, seeing uncivil behavior towards employees. We had a chief that was being attacked on the internet, and in talking with him, you got to take the high road. You cannot get into this with the individuals, because we didn't know who they were. And we, brought him in, sat down. I know this is tough. I know this is your career. I know, but you have got to hold the line with me, because if you don't, they're going to win. And unfortunately, he didn't, and it didn't go well.
So I'm just curious on your all's take on this. Can the general public, so not our boards, not our employees, can the general public be taught or encouraged on the issue of civility? And then when you think about that, whose job is that? James, you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. Kind of tagging on to the last question, I do think, the public that are interested and are watching our board meetings are taking that as an example. as Jerome indicated, unfortunately, a lot of the items on the news and the stuff that's sensationalized is not happening on the local level. So there's a lot that is out of our control, I believe. So it's hard to go in with that expectation, and I think it's a little naive to say we're going to, turn the civility around for all of our public. That being said, we are the leaders. We are setting the example for the entire community. I think a lot of it has to do with how we tell the story of local government. We spend a lot of time, and I think we have a duty to spend extra time during these difficult civility periods to tell the real story. I get to work with our PIO a lot, and she's incredible, and that's her number one job, telling the story of local government. And nothing does a better job to educate and perhaps turn the tide and change some minds when it comes to showing the public the really amazing things that are happening every single day in our community. And so I do think that really, really makes a difference. So, probably my biggest suggestion is never underestimate the power of that community engagement and the ability of that to change the tide, because that's one thing we can control. There's a lot out of our control, but that's one that we've got control over.
So what I wrote down was rules of conduct. As meetings are happening, whether it's the cards that they fill out to say that, hey, they want to speak, there should be some rules of conduct on there. You can post those rules during the public comment on your television screens and have it either static or scrolling to remind the public how to conduct themselves. I also think the mayor or the leader of the board should also chime in to limit the attacks that are not sort of business related and are personal in nature. That person has a role and responsibility to teach and let the public know what's allowable. In my community, which I'm sure in your community, there's citizens who come up and speak and have spoken for multiple years on multiple issues on multiple people. So it really doesn't matter who is in the chair. It's not personal. They just don't like your government, and they don't like what you're doing, and that's part of their DNA, and I don't think you're ever going to be able to change that. But I would encourage us all, when those people start talking, it's very easy to dismiss them as someone who is constantly on that side of the fence. But 8 out of 10 times, if you listen to someone who is saying something negative, there is something you can take out of there and do better and make your government better. You just have to find it. I had a boss up north. I was in North Carolina, and he was from New York, Buffalo, and he was he cursed and fussed and did all the things that you didn't want to do, but he always had a message in there. There was always a takeaway, and it was never wrapped with a pretty bow on it. And the people who could not deal with him were the people who could not get past the delivery of it to figure out what he wanted and go do it. Public comment civility is no different. Listen, see if there's something that we can do, and go do it. If it's not, then you can't carry that for them on you. Just know that it's not your fault, nothing you can do about it, and move on.
I've gotten to watch him deal with that somehow I got on an email chain on an issue that has absolutely nothing to do with the county, on a code enforcement issue.
Yes.
About one of his members, that he has been so consistent, and you could just see he's trying to pull that little nugget out. Is there something I can adjust on what we're doing? No, I can't help you there, but we're going to do this. So you practice that. Yeah. Rich, you have any?
Transparency. Every community is different, and we're all faced with different aspects of who we're dealing with in the elected board. But being out in front of an issue and talking about it, and we just updated our fire assessment, and had a great discussion with Jonathan about it as we were leading up to it. And one of the things that we did was we got out into the business community. Even though there were some that were against it, we were out telling exactly everything, transparent across the board, and it definitely helped in bringing the tenor down in the discussion. So being transparent, and when something goes wrong, admitting it as quickly as possible and getting ahead of it, which, I mean, we've heard over the last couple of days in some of the reflections from the speakers, getting out in front of it and saying what's happening takes the edge off of what can happen on the other side.
Now, each of you must have, at some point, and you can take a minute to think about it and then verbalize it, but you must have a horror story or just an experience of where either your coworker, your board, yourself, you each have to have one. So I would leave out your present employers if you can, or at least frame it in a way that doesn't make it seem like your present employers. But when do you want to share with us a story while the two panic to think of one? Or, oh, look, Rich is lining up quick. He's, oh, I got plenty.
I got a couple. I'll go back to the downturn and an update of, I talk about assessments a lot, I don't know why. But it was about 2009 and 9 or 10, and we had just updated a methodology on our non-ad valorem assessment for fire. And there were some shifts and some things, and so the new methodology came out and it blew up. It was a year's worth of work, but as it started, there was kind of a disagreement going on between the OCA and the county administration's office, and so we ended up in a public meeting. Basically, we had one of our commissioners there, and a bunch of landowners came in, and they were there to talk about the assessment, and we were going to give them a briefing. OCA was in the room. I sit down with my financial individual, and I walked over to the OCA and said, hey, are you guys going to come up here with us to talk about some of the methodology issues? And they said, no, we're going to stay right here on the side of the room. And I realized at that moment that I was going into the crucible. I came back and I sat down, and my financial person sitting next to me, Christy, leans over, where's OCA? And I said, they're not coming.
Yeah.
And she just, her eyes got really big, and it turned around, and it was an onslaught. We were getting attacked on everything. Why does a fire engine go with a rescue? I mean, it was just, hammer, like, it was bad. And I, throughout the entire thing, I followed the one basic tenet that my grandmother, my mother-in-law, my mother taught me, which is always be respectful. And I kept a very even keel throughout it. Answered the questions. Even when we got cut off, I'd wait, come back to the question and try to answer it. 2.5 hours. Finally left the room. The commissioner stayed with the group that was there. And it was one of the worst meetings of my entire life. But out of that, because of what I truly believe was an act of God causing me to be calm when I was really inside very frustrated. About a week later, one of the individuals that was leading the charge called me in my office about 9 o'clock in the morning. I answered the phone, and he said, Chief Collins? I said, yes, sir. He said, I just want to let you know you're a good man. You did good the other day. We appreciate the fact that you were respectful to us. And from that moment on, he was a friend and actually helped us with some of the stuff. Still talk to him once in a while today. So I really do believe that respect is part of the deal.
I'll bring up, current employer, but a good story. We'll
protect you. Don't
yeah, that's right. We recently updated our land development regulations. Comprehensive rewrite of the LDRs, dealing with all sorts of fun, controversial stuff, right? Building heights, historic preservation, environmental, anything that could possibly be controversial, we touched in that rewrite. 750-page code. We've been working on it for almost 5 years. So you think about the amount of public engagement and public meetings that have gone into that, about almost $1 million worth of consulting fees and staff time, and just an incredible project. And we had a new planning director at the time, and the last planning director who had really led the project, unfortunately, we just weren't going to see the end of it. And so we made a commitment. We said, this was about a year ago, we said, we're going to finish this project. It's been 5 years. This has to happen. We had the board on board. Everybody was on board. The very small group of public were very loud, right? The group that had many opportunities to share their concerns. The code had been adjusted through the process multiple times to try to incorporate the things that they could. But at the end of the day, our council just didn't agree with everything that they had recommended, this group. So we were actually at this conference, I believe, and we got the phone call talking with our mayor, and we said, all right, we're going to hold some more public workshops. Let's do it. We're in the, kind of the 11th hour. But rather than fight this, we'll hold I think we held 3 more public workshops before we ended up approving it. And the first one was a disaster. It went about as you would expect it to go. 200 people, after hours. We had animals in there. We had like a whole kind of hover around section that was constantly beeping and adjusting. Whenever the mayor would hit the gavel, the dog would bark. And then people would clap and the dog would bark. And so it turned into this just kind of cyclical kind of chaos. And at one point I kind of leaned over to one of our staff. I said, you can't make this up. It's like an SNL skit right now. But it was, at the time, stressful, chaotic, lots of personal attacks, no civility or very little. But reflecting back now a year later, so glad that we did it. Those 3 meetings, as painful as they were, reinforced the fact that we then approved the LDRs. We are now a year into it. We've made constant adjustments to improve them throughout that time. And we're better off for going through that, even though it was painful.
Jerome, you have one you want to share?
Yes, I have one very intimate one I want to share. So as a first-time administrator, it's you've seen it growing and progressing through your career, but until you actually get to be the recipient of it, it feels a lot different. And in my current situation, where I came in on a split vote in 4-1, and there was a bias from the beginning, and people have different biases for different reasons. If you haven't noticed, I look very differently than my colleagues up here. I'm the only one without hair, and some people may have a bias because of that, and it really doesn't matter. But once you start to do the job, you're supposed to be judged on the merit of what you do, how you do it, and how you represent our profession. Now, our profession, as I said earlier, as an industry is under attack, but our jobs as public administrators are also under attack. There's way too many people in our culture and our country who believe that people who are successful in other disciplines can step into our roles and do the jobs easier and better. And to me, well, first of all, there is a small group of individuals who have done that successfully. So if you're in the room and you've done it, congratulations, but it's not the norm. Normally, there's a progressional track of how people get to the seat and how well they do in it, and there's a correlation there. And I think that we all need to be, thank you. We all need to be mindful of that and how it reflects on us and the years of experience that we put in to get to where we're trying to go. But once you are in the job, you should be judged on how you are doing the job. And most commissioners, and I know my topic was the board, the 4 that I have are phenomenal, and I'm not going to lie. And it doesn't mean that they don't criticize or constructive course correct me in our one-on-ones and at the right moments, and sometimes they don't even use the right words, but they never do it publicly because they know that that just shows a dysfunction that the people who want to feed off of will feed off of that, and it encourages them. So I have never seen anywhere I've ever been in the multiple jurisdictions I've been at where a seated elected official actively thrives on instigating the negative civility in our community. And that's a tough thing to deal with. And then you say, well, how do you deal with it and what are you doing? You can only endure it for so long, and that's what they believe, and that's what they know. So their goal is to get you to submit and move on. And people keep asking and saying, well, when are you going to leave, and how long are you going to be here, and don't let this person run you away. My satisfaction and what I would encourage us all is to remember our value systems and where it's rooted in. As long as my family and my wife are happy, I'm good on the personal side. It is not about me. As long as my employees and the majority of the commissioners are happy and the citizens that I hear from, which represent the majority of our community, are good, I'm good as well. We can never let the loud voice of the negative drive us out of something that we know that we're doing right when we're doing it right for the right reasons.
All right, we're gonna. So I'm going to throw one out there that I think is the bane of all civility, and not just in our work, but just in society as a whole. And this is for all three, because it relates to meetings, it relates to our community at large, our coworkers, the whole 9 yards. I personally think social media is the apocalypse, but that's just me. How, over the course of your career, Rich, you've been doing this for the longest. I just like saying that to him. Yeah. How have you seen the impact of that change our relationships in terms of being civil to each other, given the respect and letting the relationship, listening to the fact that people have other ideas than us? Have you seen that change, particularly as it relates to social, or maybe you haven't, you think social media is awesome?
I love social media.
Yeah, I know you do.
As I mentioned earlier, I've seen it destroy relationships with people. I mean, people that I know that are department heads that are in government, or they're retired, or they're working still, or even fire. I just watch the level of discourse and what's being said, and it really does bother me when I read. So I try to stay off it as much as possible. I really try to put up, happiness, unicorns. But it affects, internally, it affects things like when we're in negotiations, and there are groups, what is happening, and it's across all of our communities, right? Endemically, you can take a look at one group, so a bargaining unit, and leadership in a bargaining unit trying to bring the group together. There's so many competing factions now that have an open voice on social media that could be one or two people that are affecting a 500-member organization, which is absolutely amazing when you see the level of what's being said or shared about people. And then what's just being put up. I mean, we deal with it, and how we deal with it is through policy and through training, but just that discussion yesterday, I don't know who went to the discussion about First Amendment, and I tell you, I have family members that may have social media accounts, and I say, you need to take that stuff down. It's just wrong. It is going to affect you. But it's nothing really bad. Maybe not to you, but to somebody who reads it, it may be. And so then when you see people who work in your organization that have social media that shows they work in the organization, maybe it doesn't say it, but it shows it, and then they're putting stuff up that reflects ultimately, I think, on the organization. And we've had to deal with several of those over the last several years, and have unfortunately terminated positions over it. So it's a constant battle, because I think people think it's like a free space that you can just say whatever you want, and that's just the internet, but it really has profound effects on the organization.
So I'll take the positive spin. I think social media, we've heard a lot from different panels this week that it can be very, very dangerous. And I agree with you. But Jonathan, jokes about it. Sarasota County has one of the best social media outreach teams. We use it as a model on a lot of stuff that we do. It's amazing. And throughout crisis and Hurricane Ian that we had recently, social media is a powerful tool for community engagement and education. But you just have to put it in perspective and know that you're grabbing a slice of the community, the good and the bad. We have kind of a fun game, our PIO and I play, where we'll post something that's just like fantastic news, firefighters rescue dog. Like, all right, how many comments until it turns negative? And the answer's 3. By the third comment, it's like, that dog probably had rabies. Should have put it down. Wasting taxpayer money. It always goes negative at some point. And so you just know that going into it. You're getting a slice of the community, and the community is diverse in thought. And there's a lot of negative out there. There's a lot of false information out there. So I think social media has a tendency to propagate that and bring it to the surface. But it's all at the same time, we're never going back. Our job is to use any tool available to engage the public, and that's constantly changing for us. And I don't know what it will be in the future, but the digital connections and the ability to access us quicker is never going to go away. So we have to embrace it and use it to our advantage.
I guess I'll take the middle of the road. I think it has its pros and cons, and I believe, like for personally, I've never been on Facebook. I don't think it's a valuable tool for me. Now, my wife was on it to get pictures of people that you don't see very often, and I think that's a very valuable way to stay connected with your loved ones. I do not believe that it's a very valuable tool to hear other people's opinions. I don't care about the opinions, but there's still value in it, and you don't throw away the tool just because of how people are using it. Now, professionally, I look at it and I use the example of we're going through a couple of contentious items in the community, and they like to post their feedback there. Well, that's not the way to get the feedback up to us in order for us to react to it. So we're not going to filter our way through your negativity in order to try to figure out what it is that you're trying to get from your government. We put out information, we put out timely information that the community needs and should be aware of, but we have other vehicles where you can engage us and reach out to us to report problems and have conversations. Our budget interactions where we want to hear from you, where we are transparent and accessible, and we come out to various locations in our community, and that's how we want to hear from you, because we do want to hear from your voice. And it doesn't always have to be positive. And I don't want people to think that, well, you only want to hear the good and not the bad. No, but make sure that you're directing the bad voices that you have in a productive manner to get a different result. If you just want to sit and join a group of people and have a pity party and complain, which is what I see most of them doing, then have at it. But that's not the best way to get the most effective use out of your government. And I would just challenge the people who use social media and who live there, if that's your thing. I don't judge it if it is. Just make sure that there's a productive pathway out of it, and then it reaches your local elected officials and your local leadership in a way that can change into a positive result and outcome.
So when I was growing up, and when you're growing up, you think everybody grows up with the same, household dynamics that you had, right? I mean, because why wouldn't they? We lose perspective because that's what we're exposed to. But, my parents would always say, if we had people over at the dinner table, we don't talk about sex, we don't talk about politics, and we don't talk about religion when people are over. Those are three topics we stay away from. And for me, and yes, we thank you, our social media team does a very good job, but I feel like social media is the antithesis of that. Everybody feels the need to talk about those three topics in keyboard warriors, right? Things that they would never say if they were with somebody. And I think that happens in the public discourse, and you're not wrong. We had a wastewater consent order come down, so now every single time we have a sanitary sewer overflow, we have out there taking pictures and putting it, and I said, we're gonna do this every single time. I want photos every single time. And there was one lady, every single time. She'd come in and she'd repeat all the dates that there had been sanitary. It didn't matter if it was a gallon or 200 gallons. But what's interesting is that the social media environment started regulating her on their own, saying, no, I actually think they're doing a lot of good work on this. Look at those employees out there at 2 o'clock in the morning working on this issue. Whatever, telling that story. But it's just the apocalypse. I don't know how else to say it. I would like each of you to maybe take a moment and talk, because you're all very positive about it. At least to me, they all seem like that they do think that there's that path forward where we can get back to maybe a more civil world. But going forward, maybe what each of you are going to do a little bit different and how you approach these environments to even push that a little bit more. Rich, you want to kick us off?
Well, I try to think about it from a standpoint of when people are being uncivil, generally they're angry, right? Most of the time we see them angry. Right? If you agree with me, then anger, I don't want to sound like Dr. Phil, but anger is a masking emotion for fear. So generally, if somebody is being uncivil, it has to do with something they're fearful over, right? So fundamentally, what am I doing as a leader in my organization when I see that, to try to understand what's the underlying issues for why they're behaving the way they are. In the current dynamic of where we're at as a society, there's a lot of things that people are fearful over that's causing anxiety and the way they behave on social media or in person. But within the workplace, I'm trying to focus on the very fundamentals that I was raised with, which goes back to those kinds of things, but being respectful to one another. Every time I talk with newly appointed lieutenants or officers or people, and I have an ability to talk about leadership, I talk about respect as being the fundamental component of growth in your role as a leader. If you have to be able to respect somebody just for being human. If you start there, then it's pretty hard for you to get angry. You can disagree, but if you respect them, you can have dialogue. And they may not, but if you do that long enough, you're going to wear them down. I mean, they just, okay, you done? Now can we talk? So I spend a lot of time, as I was talking earlier, we're building a training program for all of our administrative team on how we interact, how we behave, and how that expectation. The good thing is, as a profession, as a department, our department has a very high visibility in the community. We're well liked, and our feedback on how we do is very high, 98% on positive interactions in the public. So we do very well. The mission is the mission, but continuing the dialogue and trying policies and procedures. So going back to the discussion yesterday on accountability and leadership, you have to model it and then you have to enforce it, right? If somebody's not following it, then you have to take action. Otherwise, it moves through the organization. So training, focusing on policy and procedure, and continuing to take action if it's necessary.
All right, now I'm going to tell you, you didn't answer my question. No, you told me what the organization is going to do different. I said, what is Rich Collins going to do different?
You want to think about it?
Go ahead.
We have that conversation all the time.
Well, James Clinch is going to personally, no, you know, my takeaway on civility is, you know, we are public administrators, so we have to look at what is in our control. And when it comes to what we can do personally, we have a lot of control. When it comes to our staff, we have a little bit less control. We probably have less control than we think we have, but we have a fair amount of control and we can affect them. When it comes to our community at large, really very little control over how they behave and how they act. So for me, you know, I think it's using the influence that we have to turn that tide in the areas that we have control over. So especially our staff members. I'll bring up, you know, Hurricane Ian, which we all experienced, some to more a degree than others. But you know, it was a great example of both civility internally and then seeing civility externally strained, right? It's hard to have civility during good times, clear sky times. It's really hard to have civility during high stress crisis situations. The experience that I had with our staff and working with the staff of our other county and city teams, incredible to see the way they rose to the occasion and didn't let stress affect them, even though it was an incredibly challenging situation. If anything, it made them have more civility because it highlighted the importance of the mission and a shared mission. So that was just incredibly encouraging and something that we've carried forward into clear sky conditions. Now for the public, it was kind of the opposite in a lot of ways. You saw a public where, you know, especially an older demographic, where things were just not the way they're supposed to be. You know, my garbage isn't coming when it's supposed to come. There's this pile in front of my house. My power's not on. Very unsettled. Who am I going to take it out on? You know, the only one I can, which is the city. And so it was a great example for our staff who were going through their own challenges to try and have empathy for what our citizens were going through. It was a huge learning experience for our staff. I think everybody came out better for it. And it's a skill that then carries forward into those clear sky conditions. So I think what I'm doing and going to continue to do is use every ounce of influence that you have to teach people empathy and to teach the value of civility, not just into your professional career, but it affects every relationship in your life.
What I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to try to be a better listener. I think when it comes to civility, I have a tendency to sort of stop listening halfway through when the person you say, there's no rationalizing with this person, they're just off the deep end, and, I tend to stop listening, and I'm going to try to at least listen a little bit longer. If I can't get to the end, at least a little bit longer than what I do right now, and try to be a better agent of clearing up misinformation. There's a lot of information out there that people have that is just not accurate, and you can say it on 10 days in 10 different ways, and some people still don't get it and want to believe what they want to believe. But I think that we have to keep providing them with the most accurate information possible to remove some of the platforms that they stand on that they believe to be true that we know for facts that aren't true. And the other thing is, the thing that I think about with how I lead and how I want to lead is that, I want to always continue to demonstrate behavior that I want our team to demonstrate. So when they say, why are you putting up with this, and why are you fighting this fight, and why are you doing this? Sure, we could take the path of least resistance and get to somewhere else faster, but that's not the right model of leadership I think we should be providing. Everything can't be a battle, but some things you have to stand up for, and I think that civility with your board, civility, of course, with your employees and the community is something that we all should make sure that we continue to keep that door open, because if we close it, based on where the country is right now, it may never, ever reopen, and we want to get it fixed and not sort of make the problem worse over time.
For me, as I was going through, thinking about the session as we came today, and you touched on it earlier and again right now, Jerome, and this is just for me, the one mouth, two ears, but particularly with people that you've been with long enough to develop a pattern of behavior on, and you were talking about it earlier, because they may be crazy about 8 things, but that doesn't mean they're wrong about the other 2.
That's correct.
And to really take that time to make sure I'm using the 2 instead of the 1, or not tuning out in order to get to that. So I think we all have things we can do to make our organizations and our community just a little bit more civil than they are today. If it's all right with you all, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'll see if there's anybody has anything, questions, or, yes, sir.
Yeah, I think in 100 years we're all going to be dinosaurs when it comes to our thoughts on social media, of course, but, while we have this thought, we can certainly point it in the direction that hopefully will take off the right way. My question is about the chilling effect on people wanting to run for local elections. So social media, I've heard this increasingly in the last 2 years, where residents will tell me, I was thinking about running for city council, but I see what happens on social media to council members. And yeah, you're Armageddon. What do you say to that?
When do you want to take a stab at it? Jerome?
So what I would say is, in order to be an elected official, you have to have thick skin, regardless of where the criticism comes from. It could be social media, it could be someone in your face, it could be public comment, it could be someone writing you a letter. It's going to happen. It takes a certain level of confidence in knowing that you're doing something for the right reason in order to make you want to continue along that pathway. I think that that's what they want. They want to discourage people, and so they want to attack them on social media. And if that's where you place your value and how people see you, then you're probably not going to make it a long time anyway. I would say take it for what it's worth and from where it's coming, and if there's something in there that can be cleared up or clarified, then so be it. If not, it's an opinion, and that's just the way the world communicates it sometimes.
I'll just add, we've heard a lot about at these conferences how challenging this career is, but elected office is no picnic, right? I mean, it takes the right person who's willing to endure what that is. And so I kind of agree with you. The impression that you're going to get abused from social media, it's kind of good that they know that going into it, because it is a really, really challenging job. It's a thankless job in a lot of ways. I have a lot of empathy for our elected officials because, you know, for our city, it's really not a paid position. It's a volunteer civic service, and you know, we kind of, you know, the abuse kind of screens out a lot of folks that you know wouldn't be able to endure that for the long haul, and so we end up, you know, with some good folks that are really in it for the right reasons. Not every time, but the majority of our elected officials are in it for the right reasons, and you know, I appreciate what they do for us.
Yes, ma'am. Say it nice and loud, though. I know.
Anyway, just to piggyback on what that gentleman said, and I'm really glad you brought it up. In the past 12 years, I've been throughout the country, and I've seen different ways that things are happening. But the one constant that I'm hearing from all other states that I've been involved in is the same thing. Social media is ruining those candidates that can be effective and have the knowledge to actually be a good elected official. And those that just think it's a piece of cake with no forethought are winding up being elected. And I just saw this last election, which is a shame because we had one person on the board that was absolutely awesome, and his wife told him, no, you are not running again because of social media. Our family is in the spotlight, and we can't go anywhere without being attacked. Whether we respond to the attacks or not, our families are the ones that are suffering. So I agree that we may get some good people that have hard skin, but those that could do an excellent job tend to say no, because they don't want their families to be exposed to all of this mess. And I think in our profession as well, there's some of us that have been around for a long time, okay, and have been able to survive it. But there's others that have not been able to. So social media has ruined a lot, regardless of which spectrum you're looking at. That's just my opinion. I'm with you.
I do think when it comes to the social media, though, and I can't remember which one of you just made this point like 30 seconds ago. If they weren't going to survive the meanness from social media, they probably weren't going to survive the meanness normally anyway. It's just one more opportunity for them to be exposed to it that maybe they hadn't thought of. And maybe there's opportunities, you know, when you're doing citizen academies or as the case may be, that you use that as the opportunity to talk. A lot of our elected officials come through those routes, whether it's our planning commissions or go through the learning academies we put on, and you're exposed to the reality of it. The ones in recent years I've had just click off. I mean, they literally don't, that's not who voted for them. It's not who's going to vote for them next time. So they just don't pay attention to it. And somehow maybe helping the good people understand that everybody doesn't like you now and you haven't even run for office. It's not going to change that much when you do. And if you can help people understand that, maybe it helps get some of those people that you're defining as good candidates to run again. So, what else?
Does it depend on what social media site? If you go to a rant site, like the city's word of mouth, you know, Timbuktu word of mouth, all over, those are rant sites, and the people that go there are generally negative. They're negative people. The commissioner that spoke the other day from Lake County and said, you know, I go to social media, I have 300,000 in my county, and I look at it, and people say, oh, the social media is blowing up. You know, actually, a rant site is, and if you look at the rant site, it's 40 people. So 40 people out of 300,000 are having a lot of fun trashing a council member, a city manager, an employee, or an initiative. gentleman said earlier, you know, you can hang out in different spaces, right? You can hang out in social media rant sites and then judge how you're being viewed. Or you can go to the HOA and meet the people there that aren't going to be ranting. You can go to the Chamber of Commerce. There's so many different places to go to get feedback on whether you're doing well or not doing well. But for some reason, it just feels that the rant sites are the ones that are being used to judge how the public feels when it's not true. It's 40 to 50 people that are just going to listen on an issue when there's 20,000 people that aren't really doing that.
And I think we could spend all day talking about, I mean, we could do an entire conference probably on social media and the impacts and that, but when it comes to civility, I think it still goes back to what I think Jerome said, which is how then you choose to engage with it or not. You know, what part of that you control. So, you know, whether it's your elected officials or you or your staff, I would think it still comes down to that, regardless of the platform. But that's just my take on it.
No, I totally agree, and I think he made a very good point. I couldn't have said it any better, but, you know, just, it's our choice what we choose to engage and where we put our time. To the young lady's point, I do not believe anyone's family should ever be of any target whatsoever. To me, that's crossing a line that should never be crossed, but I do know that there are people who do it, and it just shows more about their character than our own. But there are mean and evil people in this world, and they're going to find ways to be mean and evil if they truly want to be. It's just the world the way it is.
No,
To touch on this point, civility is a social construct that comes from a physical presence of something because you're trying to reach consensus, because you're trying to reach an end. Social media, on the other hand, thrives on controversy. The idea is to extend the topic, to give you the likes, the dislikes, and everything else. So there's a dichotomy between these two methods of communication. And part of what happens is that there's a misunderstanding on the goals that each one is trying to attain. Whereas in physical presence, you're trying, like I said, to get a consensus. But in the digital world, you invite controversy because, first of all, you're behind the screen, so you're not really looking and seeing what it is and how you're affecting somebody. And more importantly, you're getting somebody's ire up on the other side of the screen, and they'll jump in, and somebody else will jump in. And then as a social media influencer, you have to be successful in what you're trying to do. We misunderstand it. And we look at it and we say, well, to your point, there's only a few that are looking to do this because they are influencers. But we miss out on the fact that this is a small representation of what the actual physical entity in our communities really feel, and what the true sense and the true measure is when they come and they'll let you know how they feel. And, you know, part of those feelings tend, because when you go back and forth between real and digital, sometimes those feelings daily form. So at times you get a little more rambunctious because you have to rein yourself in physically as opposed to saying whatever comes to mind visually.
So we're out of time, but we're out of time. It's 3 o'clock. They're going to kick us out. So, and I'm sure they'll be willing to hang out and answer questions or have more discussion in the lobby or whatever the case may be. But what I still heard from all three of them all the way through, whether it was their bad experiences or not, is that all three of them felt that improvements in our organization, within how our board meetings run, with our community at large, that there are in all cases, the opportunity to have civility as a more attainable goal than we are right this minute. And I wasn't sure that's where they were going to go when we started today. So I find that refreshing anyway. So would you join me in thanking them for their time?